Namaste Saraswati Devi Guruvani Pracharine Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Paskatya Disatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasudeva Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. So sorry I'm a little late again today. Okay, so I wanted to go over the homework done by Shrivani because it's very interesting what she did. So the homework was to write an essay and on the theory of knowledge that we discussed yesterday. This is a very interesting, a very good subject because we should know what is and what isn't knowledge, or at least how to attain knowledge. So, Daniel, there's some papers that were printed out. Can you give them to me? So, Shrivani writes, complete knowledge, according to Vedas, is both phenomenal and numinous. This should be the basis on which any knowledge should be derived. Okay, so yeah, phenomenal, of course, means okay, so let's see. So she writes, phenomenal means very remarkable and extraordinary. Well, that is a meaning of the word phenomenal, but it's not the primary meaning. So in this particular reference, that is, what is knowledge, phenomenal basically means what you can measure and what you can perceive with your senses. In this particular instance, words have different meanings, so sometimes we have to be to be conscious of that and look at the different meanings of the word. Let me just look up that word phenomenal. We looked it up yesterday. 1 second. So, first meaning is very remarkable or extraordinary. Yes, that's true. But the second meaning is perceptible by the senses or through immediate experience. So that's the meaning that we were looking for. So you can make that one little correction. Okay, so we'll come back to let's see here. Second, right. Okay, so Shivani says, complete knowledge, according to the Vedas, is both phenomenal and numinous. This should be the basis on which any knowledge should be derived. Well, in other words, what she means is there is knowledge that you can perceive with the senses, and there's knowledge that you can understand by amplifying the scope of the vision of the senses. So, therefore, you can use microscopes and telescopes and things like that, right? So that'll help you try and improve or increase the scope of perception of phenomenal things. But numinous things are things that are, let's say, in one sense, spiritual and connected to God, or spiritual types of things. And sometimes you can't directly see those things, but they still exist. That's the whole point. Everything is not just phenomenal. So numinous means, it has different meanings, having a strong religious or spiritual quality, indicating or suggesting the presence of a divinity. Okay, that's one meaning of it. So, Webster's dictionary meaning of the word is filled with a sense of the presence of divinity, appealing, supernatural or mysterious. Okay, so supernatural or mysterious, that would definitely be things that are spiritual. But it can also be things that are beyond the scope of normal, sense perception, but yet can be understood to exist anyway, even though it's beyond our normal sense perception. Okay, so I agree with Divya in the sense that, one must take into account both, not just phenomenal things. Numinous in this context means related to or coming from Krishna in disciplic succession. It can be, yes, but it's more general than that, but that's generally a correct statement for us. Of course, outside people might not agree with that. The knowledge prepared by people today is predominantly phenomenal in nature and not numinous. Correct. This is because they are not aware of the source of all knowledge, who is the cause of all causes, and in other words, Krishna. Well, yes, Krishna is the cause of all causes, and most people are not cognizant of the existence of, or not knowing the existence of Krishna. The invocation mantra of the Shishopanishad states that the unification mantra of the Shishopanishad states that the personality of Godhead is perfect and complete, and because he is completely perfect, all emanations from him, such as this phenomenal world, are perfectly equipped as complete wholes. Let me just check that. Make sure that quote is correct. Yes, it is. Very good. Okay. Therefore, the theory of knowledge will make sense if it has a reference to the source of complete knowledge coming from Krishna. Okay, yes. In other words, what she's saying here is, and it's very good that you quoted the Ishopanishad invocation mantra. The personality of God is perfect and complete, and because he is completely perfect, all emanations from him, such as this phenomenal world, are perfectly equipped as complete wholes. Now, why am I reading this carefully? Because now I'm going to give you a major point that differentiates Vedic knowledge from what the modern so-called scientists, philosophers, and so forth are talking about when they speak of knowledge. Prabhupada makes this point also, that modern scientists are not seriously concerned about the origin of things. let's say that things can exist in three, let's say, three divisions. First division, origin. Second division, the functioning of that thing in this material world. Third division, the end of everything. So scientists are more interested in the middle thing, the functioning of things. They're not seriously interested in the origin nor the end of things, although they'll talk about it. So we've studied already the major theory about the origin of things, the Big Bang Theory. This Big Bang Theory is all speculation. There's no real scientific proof of it. And it doesn't make sense in any case. And the end of all things, well, scientists make all kinds of wild, crazy predictions. The world's coming to an end in 2022, or the world's coming to an end in, a million years from now, or the world's coming to an end in 50 billion years from now. They make all kinds of wild speculations about it. But it's not serious. Nor are there speculations about the origin of the world. Of course, in the Bible, it says God created everything in the beginning of time, right? And so in the Abrahamic religions, it's very clear that there's a God, and he's a creator, and he's a destroyer also, and he's also some kind of maintainer. So, but scientists, they believe all the origin story of the creation in Genesis of the Bible, or the so-called book of Revelation at the end of the Bible about the end of the world. That's a whole bunch of fairy tales. It's all speculation. That's their point of view. But see, the Bible has some details about the origin of everything, and talking about God, and a lot of details about the end of everything, again, in reference to God. But the scientists, they don't take the origin and end of origin of things and end of things seriously. They just speculate with no scientific knowledge behind it. Okay, so we'll continue now after the opening of deities.
tamaham bhajami adipurusham. Dada Prabhu? Govindam adipurusham tamaham bhajami.
Haribo. That was one of the shortest kirtans of Paramananda Prabhu. He did that on purpose. Thank you very much. It was short and sweet, though. Thank you. Okay, so we just discussed how scientists are only concerned with the middle. They're not serious about the beginning of things and not so serious about the end of things. They're really concerned about the middle, what they can measure, what is phenomenal, right? It's things that they can see with their senses and measure with their rulers and their weighing machines and so forth. So this, of course, is avoiding anything that's numinous. So I want to read something that Prabhupada has written. This is Srimad Bhagvatam, 6th Canto, 1st chapter, 39th verse, 6.139. And it's in a lecture he gave on this verse in Los Angeles, June 5th, 1976. And he says, so in this verse, it says, a question is asked, what is the process, Maharaj Pariksit is asking Sukadeva Goswami, he says, what is the process of punishing others? Who are the actual candidates for punishment? Are all karmis engaged in fruitive activities punishable, or only some of them? That's a great question. So, Prabhupada begins, he says, so the challenge was replied that you are representing Dharmaraj. So you have come here to take away this person. And we are prohibiting. So, this is the story where Ajamil dies and the Yamadutas come to take him to hell. And then they're being challenged, the Yamadutas are being challenged by the Vishnudutas and saying, you can't take away this person because he's pure. And they say, well, that's nonsense. He's not pure. There's a long history of his sinful activities. So they're saying, so you have challenged us. So first of all, explain your position. So the Yamadutas are saying to the Vishnudutas, you explain why you think he is pure and why we shouldn't take him to hell. Whether you know what is dharma and what is adharma, who is punishable, under what circumstance one is punished, and one who is punished, where does he go? Actually, all these descriptions are there in the Srimad Bhagvatam, different types of hellish life, what kind of sinful activities are punished by what kind of hellish condition. Everything is there in the 5th canto. Everything is there. There are there are different planets where Yamaraj is there, and how a dead man or the soul is taken there, the path. Everything is in detail there. If you say it is mythology, why should you say mythology? You have not seen the whole universe. How is it and how it's situated? You are simply imagining from this place, the earth, this tiny little planet in the universe. So your imagination or your imaginology, Prabhupada creates a word. In fact, let's see if you can find it in a dictionary. Maybe it is a word in a dictionary, I'm not sure. But he says, your imaginology. If someone finds it on the dictionary, let me know. Your imaginology, and we have our mythology. In other words, they claim they have their imaginology, and they claim Srimad Bhagavatam is our mythology. So Prabhupada's making fun of the nonsense misbelievers. So we have got some evidence, but you have no evidence. So this is a fact. We've got Srimad Bhagavatam, that's evidence. And the scientists and the philosophers and the archaeologists and the historians, they don't have any evidence about the universe and all the planets and the higher planets and middle planets and lower planets. They have a little bit of knowledge, but very little. They don't understand anything about the lower planets. At least we have got some support of the books. That's the Vedic literature. But what do you have? You are simply imagining, I think, I believe. What is this nonsense? What is your proof? Everyone is saying, I believe. Hundreds and thousands of people say, I believe. But what is correct? Everyone, at least we have got something correct. We don't say, I believe. This is not our process of knowledge. In other words, you're saying our process of knowledge is not based on belief or speculation. We, Krishna conscious person, we never say, I believe. No, we immediately quote from the Shastra. Jai Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Jai Shri Radha Madhava ki jai. So here Prabhupada is being very emphatic. E-M-P-H-A-T-I-C. Emphatic. Very good word to know. Being very firm and very, I'd say, determined. We're not going to put up with nonsense anymore. And he's emphasizing, giving full emphasis to what he calls Shruti Pramana or Veda Pramana. So there are three pramanas, P-R-A-M-A-N-A-M-S. Three pramanas. One is Nyaya Pramana, two is Shruti Pramana, and three is Smriti Pramana. Pramanas means evidences. So one is Nyaya, that's logic. Two is two is Smriti, and that is what is spoken about. Well, two is Shruti, what is spoken by Krishna himself, and three is Smriti, what is spoken about Krishna by Vedic authorities who are in disciplic succession. Basically, they're confirming and validating what Krishna says. They don't deviate. So, Prabhupada says, here's the statement, Shruti Pramana. According to Vedic civilization or evidence, according to Vedic civilization, evidence is Shruti, which means what was spoken originally by Krishna. Shruti or Vedas, and which is spoken about Krishna. If you say something and if you give evidence, proof of the Vedic literature, then it's perfect. In other words, real knowledge is what has been spoken by Krishna and repeated by the great sages in disciplic succession. No such nonsense things, I believe, we believe, perhaps, maybe, no. Such foolish things are not accepted. Then everyone will say something. There are thousands and millions of people. Everyone will imagine something and say something. And by the way, this is why there are so many books in the world. Everyone writes their own book. Gandhi writes a book and says, Bhagavad Gita is all about non-violence. And somebody else writes a book and says, there is no God, everything started by the Big Bang. And somebody else writes a book and says, oh, the world's going to come to an end in 2024 because of global warming. All nonsense books, all useless, not full of any real evidence, just speculation. But they're very clever speculators, so they'll have graphs and they'll have statistics, and they'll have this so-called evidence and that so-called circumstantial evidence, but it's all speculation. There are thousands of millions of people. Everyone will imagine something and say something. Then where is the correct thing? This is not good. Veda Pramana. That will be described in the next verse. Veda Pranito Dharmo. Veda Pranito. What is explained in the Vedas, that is Dharma. Now, Dharma means there's two Dharmas. There's the lower Dharma and the higher Dharma. The lower Dharma is your duty according to your psychophysical state of mind and body. But your higher Dharma is your duty to serve God. So lower dharma, it's also about serving God, but it's according to your physical state and mental state. But the higher dharma is after you've purified yourself of the influence of the modes of material nature, it's just to serve God with love and devotion. See? You cannot manufacture dharma. If it is mentioned in the Vedas, what is dharma? What is dharma? Then it is acceptable. I have several times explained that you cannot make law in your comfortable home. No. Law is made by the government, and you have to accept it. You cannot say, I believe this will be law. So just like the United States, the President of the United States, and the governors of each state, the President of the United States has suggested that maybe there should be a lockdown. People should stay at home as much as possible. Only essential industries should continue working, and all non-essential businesses and industries should stop, and people should stay at home to avoid the spread of coronavirus. Well, they're making, is it a law? No, they haven't made it a law, but they made it a requirement that people, a highly suggested requirement. And in some cases, if the people don't listen, then they'll make it into law. So you have to follow the law of the government. You have to accept it. You cannot say, I believe this will be law. Who will care for your law? You may believe. You believe at your home. That will not be accepted. The law is given by the government. Keep to the right. That you must have. You must do. You cannot say, I believe left. No, I believe left thing. No, that is not law. Similarly, dharmas cha will be explained further. So what is dharma? Religion. In the dictionary, English dictionary, it is explained a kind of faith. But we do not take in that way. In other words, we don't accept that as the definition of dharma. Faith. You have got different faith, I have got different faith. How will it be dharma? The same example. If you have different faith that you do not accept this government law, that will not do. You may have faith or no faith, but you have to accept. That is dharma. That is dharma. So that very particularly analyzed dharma. Dharma means, I have given translation in many places, occupational duty. Everyone is fit for a certain occupation, and the duty ascertained for such occupation, that is dharma. It's natural, or in one word, it can be explained as characteristic. So just like a chemical, it has got some characteristic in the chemical analytical book, that you take sodium bicarbonate, the characteristics are, it tastes like this, the color is like this, and like this, and so many things. So dharma means characteristics. So what is the dharma of the living entity? We are all living entities. What is the dharma? What is the characteristic? What is common to all of us? Not because I am Hindu, my characteristic is different from your characteristic. As a living being, our characteristic is the same. Either you're a Hindu or Muslim or Christian, white or black, never mind. What is that characteristic? That characteristic is to serve. The inferior must serve the superior. That's all. This is characteristic. Find out all over the universe. Everyone is serving. So, here Prabhupada has made something very clear, that our theory, or the theory of knowledge in Krishna consciousness, is based on Shruti Pramana, what has been spoken by Krishna and repeated by the pure devotees, and that's called Smriti. And there is also Nyaya, but a Nyaya is not speculative. It's done in a spiritual deductive way. So we'll talk more about the three pramanas later, but here we have a much clearer understanding of Krishna conscious theory of knowledge, as explained by Srila Prabhupada himself. So, let's continue with Shivani's homework. So she says, the knowledge prepared by people today is predominantly phenomenal in nature and not numinous. Why is that? Because numinous knowledge is beyond the scope of the sense perception. And obviously you cannot understand it by speculation. And you can't exactly measure it or see it. But it still exists. So, therefore, and then she quotes the invocation mantra that the personality of God is perfect and complete, and because he is completely perfect, all emanations from him, such as this phenomenal world, are perfectly equipped as complete wholes. Therefore, the theory of knowledge will make sense if it has a reference to the source of complete knowledge coming from Krishna. Okay, very good. Srila Prabhupada, now she continues, Srila Prabhupada had authorized many books, and all the books he wrote are written according to the instructions given by his spiritual master and the knowledge which reached him through disciplic succession. Such knowledge, derived through the disciplic succession, has Krishna as its source. It is both phenomenal and numinous. Therefore, Srila Prabhupada's books can be considered as both phenomenal and numinous. Correct. Very correct. In other words, you get complete knowledge if you read Prabhupada's translations of the original Vedic scriptures and his purports, which are what you would call a compendium, compendium, of all the Sri Vaishnava acharyas. So he'll quote acharyas in the Kumar Sampradaya, that's Sridhar Swami, and he'll quote acharyas in the Sridhar Swami is in the Rudra Sampradaya, and he'll quote acharyas there in the Kumar Sampradaya, like what's his name, Vallabhacharya, and he'll quote acharyas that are in the Sri Sampradaya, which are like Kulashekar, Alvar, or and also in that same line, Ramanujacharya and Yamunacharya, and so forth. And he quotes, of course, in Brahma Gaudiya Sampradaya, he quotes Brahma himself, Narada Muni, and Vyasadeva, and so forth. Okay. So, Srila Prabhupada has authored many books, and all the books he wrote are written according to the instructions given by his spiritual master and the knowledge which reached him through disciplic succession. Such knowledge derived through the disciplic succession has Krishna as its source. It is both phenomenal and numinous. Therefore, Srila Prabhupada's books can be considered as both phenomenal and numinous. Okay, correct. Krishna has a form of Satchit Ananda. This means he is eternal, full of knowledge and bliss. Since people do not know that there is a source of complete knowledge in the universe, they make all efforts to create knowledge that they think is complete. Since they do not know that knowledge can only become complete when it is dovetailed to the complete whole, their knowledge can only be considered as defective and illusory. Why does the knowledge that people create, why is the knowledge that people, instead of does, you have to put is, the knowledge that people create defective and incomplete? The reasons are, 1, they possess 4 defects, which are they commit mistakes, they're under the influence of illusion, or they're easily illusioned, they have a cheating propensity, and they have imperfect senses. So, when knowledge is created by people, having these four defects, it is naturally prone to be defective, incomplete, and mostly misleading. Very good. Because people have imperfect senses, their thoughts differ from one another, and it brings about different opinions and deviation. Excellent. This leads to knowledge that is understood at a point in time and which has a chance to be modified or corrected later by someone else. Excellent. That's the whole point. This is a major point that Prabhupada makes. He says that this Vedic knowledge is timeless. It's true at all times. It's not, but most scientific knowledge are basically theories, and they're always correcting their theories. So if you read a textbook that was written in 1920 and you read a textbook that's written in 1950, you'll see that there are corrections because their theories have been modified over time. So their knowledge is subject to change all the time. And Vedic knowledge is changeless because it is perfect. Next, number 2. That was point number 1 of the reasons why knowledge of speculators is defective and incomplete. Number 2, they have a personal agenda. This means that a person creating the knowledge, or so-called knowledge, will only include details that will benefit him in ways that will make him richer or more famous. Well, okay. In other words, they're being selective, usually in their evidence. So they choose only evidence that seems to point in the direction of their theory, and they'll reject other evidence that doesn't seem to point in the direction of their theory. Number three, she says, they use selective evidence. So they have a personal agenda, then they use selective evidence. This means that even though there could be many sources of evidence or information, the person will only choose those that support his or her point of view. Number 4, they are always under the influence of the modes of material nature. This means that this person will always be under the mode of goodness, passion, or ignorance. When constantly under these modes, they can never understand what is complete knowledge. Yes. And also, let's see here. What did I write yesterday? Okay. So then there's something else. Let's see. Where did I write? Okay, I don't have it right now. So then she says, Plato believed that knowledge is innate in every one of us, and he used an experiment to prove the same. According to him, knowledge is buried deep inside the soul. This is true because all of us were souls that are part and parcel of the Supreme. Now, when you say, what was the experiment he proved? Well, if I'm not mistaken, he quoted Socrates, who questioned a boy who never went to school and never studied arithmetic and math. And by asking that boy a series of questions, he showed that boy did have innate knowledge of arithmetic and mathematics, even though he never went to school. That was one example. Okay. This is true because all of us were souls all of us are souls, which are part and parcel of the Supreme. If he is complete in knowledge, then our souls also have access to that knowledge. Therefore, all knowledge is innate in us because of our relationship with the Supreme Lord and the experiences we have from our previous lives. Well, the example is just like a child was with, or just like a person was with his or her mother at birth. No one would deny that. But very few people, or actually no one, can remember it. But they can't deny it either. So they do have if they could shake their memory up, they might be able to remember that yes, I was with my mother. I remember it now because they were there. They experienced it. So that's called innate knowledge. There was something that happened to us that we actually experienced. We just can't remember it right now. But it's somewhere in our memory if we can access it. So if he is complete in knowledge, then our souls also have access to that knowledge. Well, Krishna is complete in knowledge, and we were originally with Krishna. Therefore, all knowledge is innate in us because of our relationship with the Supreme Lord and the experiences we have from our previous lives. Philosophers like Plato also use the tripartite theory of knowledge, which says that three conditions must be satisfied in order for one to possess knowledge. They are belief, truth, and justification. Belief means that unless one believes a thing, one cannot know it. Truth means if one knows a thing, then it must be true. Justification means in order to know a thing, it is not enough to merely correctly believe it to be true. One must also have a good idea for doing so. Well, see now Shivani now is beginning to quote some philosophers, and this tripartite theory of knowledge. Well, our whole subject is theory of knowledge. So obviously, the materialists have also, and speculators have also written about the theory of knowledge. Now, is this part of her essay true or false? We'll figure that out in a minute. There are two traditions around the source of knowledge identified by the philosophers. One, empiricism, which holds that our knowledge is primarily based on experience. And two, rationalism, which holds that our knowledge is primarily based on reason. Okay. Although the modern scientific worldview borrows heavily from empiricism, there are reasons for thinking that a synthesis of the traditions is more plausible, meaning plausible, P-L is another good word, P-L-A-U-S-I-B-L-E. Plausible means possible and believable. There are reasons for thinking that a synthesis of the true traditions, meaning empiricism and rationalism, is more plausible, more possible of being true than either of them individually. Much of our knowledge, it seems, do come to us through our senses, through perception. Perception, though, is a complex process. The way that we experience the world may be determined in part by the world, but it is also determined in part by us. We do not passively receive information through our senses. Arguably, we contribute just as much to our senses as do the objects that they are experiencing. Since Plato's time, multiple such theories and analyses of knowledge have been proposed, but there is as yet no consensus on what knowledge is. Well, you see, this is the dilemma of the empirical or faulty rational approach to knowledge. After studying it for 2,500 years, still there's no complete consensus. Consensus means everyone is convinced that this is true on what knowledge is. This is a fact because it's all speculative. So the reason I'm reading Shivani's essay is because she did some research and she is using things from outside sources to sort of complement what she's sourced from our lecture yesterday. So now I'll go deeper into that in a second. In conclusion, it is very clear that the theory of knowledge cannot be complete and perfect. if it comes from humans who have the four defects, possess a personal agenda, and use selective information to come up with their own point of view, opinions, analysis, etc. The Mundaka Upanishad 1.1.3 states, when the cause of all causes becomes known, then everything knowable becomes known, and nothing remains unknown. So without deriving knowledge from the source, which is the cause of all causes, it will never be complete or agreeable to all. So her going outside of the Vedic tradition and talking about other theories of knowledge, mainly developed by the speculators. She's using that, and she's not using that as a compliment to what she's gleaned or she's understood from the Vedas. She's just showing the insufficiency of it, how it's a junk approach. It's not a valid approach, the speculative approach, where everyone is making up their own theories. And then in the end, there's no consensus, and there's no agreement that now we understand what is the truth about the theory of knowledge. So very good, Shivani, very good. And so then we have the three pramanas, or three types of evidence used in the Vedic tradition. There is nyaya, which is deductive reasoning. It's a philosophical, logical method. Now, there is a bona fide nyaya and unbona fide nyaya. The unbona fide rational approach to knowledge, or evidence of knowledge, does not start from the Vedas. It starts with a guess or a hunch. Therefore, there's this so-called scientific method of thesis, and then experimentation, and then coming up with a theory. The thesis means you have an idea. Maybe it's like this. Okay, now let me experiment to see if, by doing many experiments, there's a pattern that will come up out of all those experiences or experiments. And then based on, if there is a pattern, then I'll make up a theory. And over time, people can test the theory to see if it's right, or how much it's right. If it's right 51% of the time, it becomes a scientific theory. If it's only right about 25% of the time, it's just a theory. And if it's right 100% of the time, it's fact. So we see most things are just theories, and sometimes they come up to the level of what's considered a scientific theory, but it's still not sure. And very rare, very seldom does something come out to be 100% true, and then it becomes a fact. Well, we know one thing that's 100% true. If you're born, you're going to die. If you're born into a material body, you're going to die. So that's not a theory. That's proven 100%. But then, the origin of the world is Big Bang. That's a theory, and there's no evidence for it. There's just speculations about it. And that the world is going to end in 2024 because of global warming, that's just a theory. It's not even a theory. It's just a wild imagination. But they call it sometimes a theory. So you see, the material way of so-called rationalization is very incomplete, and because it doesn't start from the origin of everything, Krishna, and what Krishna has said, and what is repeated by the great acharyas in the Vedas. It's simply a guess based on imperfect senses and cheating propensity and illusory state of mind and very limited senses. Okay, now we're getting to understand more and more this theory of knowledge based on, Krishna consciousness, as opposed to the others. So the reason I read Shivani's essay is because she actually did a little research and went outside of Vedic tradition to show, what the materialists and empiricists are claiming, and she named her source. It's called Sociology. It's a web page on the theory of knowledge, and it says http:/sociology Morrisville EUD readings STS 101 philosophy theory of knowledge. Well, if you go there and you read it, it sounds like it's knowledge, but by the time you get to the end, let's see what it says in the end. Well, anyway, you get more confused than actually learning something. Although it looks very philosophical and very erudite. Let's look at that word, erudite, erudite. So it says, it begins theory of knowledge. So, okay, so if you go to http://www.theoryofknowledge.info, then that's the web page. Okay, so it starts like this. Epistemology, the study of the theory of knowledge, is among the most important areas of philosophy. The questions that it addresses includes the following. What is knowledge? And then there it says, the first problem encountered in epistemology is that of defining knowledge. Much of the time, philosophers use the tripartite theory of knowledge, which analyzes knowledge as justified true belief, as a working model. Rival analyses of knowledge have been proposed, but there is as yet no consensus on what knowledge is. This fundamental question of epistemology remains unsolved. Yes, of course, because if you use the speculative approach, you're never going to come to a final conclusion. Okay. And then it writes, though philosophers are unable to provide a generally accepted analysis of knowledge, we all understand roughly what we are talking about when we use words such as knowledge. Oh, yes? I don't think so. Anyway, thankfully, this means that it is possible to get on with epistemology, leaving unsolved the fundamental question as to what knowledge is. So this is a bunch of nonsense. This is goofy. This is not at all acceptable, but yet they're passing this off as knowledge, and this is what you study when you go to school. This type of shoddy, speculative approaches that leave you up in the air without knowing what knowledge actually is. And knowledge, in Shivani's essay, she quoted Mundaka Upanishad 1.1.3 states, when the cause of all causes becomes known, then everything knowable becomes known and nothing remains unknown. So if you understand that Krishna is the cause of all causes, then you will gradually, by studying more and more about Krishna, know everything, have all knowledge. But if you follow the speculators' process, after thousands of years of philosophical speculation, scientific research, blah, 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 what is their conclusion? Their conclusion is, though philosophers are unable to provide a generally accepted analysis of knowledge, we all understand roughly what we are talking about when we use words such as knowledge. Thankfully, this means that it is possible to get on with epistemology, leaving unsolved the fundamental question of as to what knowledge is. See, this is a cop-out. This is nonsense. And that's why I say they're not, and Prabhupada says, they're not concerned with the origin of things. They're only concerned with the middle, how things seem to be functioning today, and not even with the end of things. So that's not knowledge. That is speculation, that is guessing, and that is based on imperfect senses and so forth. Okay, so, and today I wanted to discuss a little further, and that is, yesterday we touched on the idea of, 1 second. Yesterday we touched on the idea of, we talked about half-truth, no truth, 4 defects. Yeah, one thing Shivani missed when she was explaining the there are 2 traditions around the source of knowledge identified by the philosophers. One is empiricism, which holds she says, so when knowledge is created by people having these 4 defects, it is naturally prone to be defective. Okay, so so she's talking about why does the knowledge that people create is defective and incomplete. So number 1, they have the 4 defects. Number 2, they have a personal agenda. And part of their personal agenda, they use selective evidence. Number 3, they're always under the influence of the modes of material nature, which means that they're easily illusioned. They don't see things clearly. And number 4, that is, they do not base their knowledge on Vedic evidence and scriptures. They just depend on the empirical method. So she missed that 4th point. She connected. She included 2 points under. She said personal agenda, and number 3 is under the modes. Personal agenda 2, selective evidence 3, and number 4 above the modes. But actually, personal agenda and selective evidence were together, and 3 was above the modes. And 4th is they do not base their knowledge on Vedic evidence. Okay. So, my point now is to discuss something else, and that is, and then we discussed what is bona fide nyaya, or rational deductive reasoning, as opposed to unbona fide nyaya, where you, in bona fide nyaya, you begin with a statement of the Vedas, and then you experiment based on that. So, now, today, I want to go a little further. That is, in the theories of knowledge, people, very clever people like a philosopher named Hegel, who was a German philosopher, and was a very, very, very intelligent man. He developed a dialectical method. Now, we've discussed this before. Dialectical method of analysis of history. And his method was based on the idea that you begin with a thesis, you come up with an antithesis, and then you develop a synthesis, which is the new thesis, and then there's another antithesis, and another thesis, and then there's a new thesis, which is the there was a previous antithesis, and there's a previous synthesis, and then there's that serves as a new thesis, and then there's an antithesis, and there's another synthesis. Okay, what is this? It's a lot of sis's in it. Thesis is an idea that you have, or a theory that you have, and then there's a counter theory, and then there's a synthesis. So, what is an example of that? So, there's a theory that the coronavirus began in wet markets of Wuhan. Now, there's another theory. There's a antithesis. No, it didn't begin in the wet markets of Wuhan. It began in the biological experimental institute in Wuhan that received a grant from the United States to study coronaviruses. And the Chinese used that money to make hybrid coronaviruses. This was after the SARS breakout. So the United States the House of Representatives gave a grant of $3 million, Jai Shishirada Nilamadeva, and to the Biological Research Institute in Wuhan, because the SARS COVID, 6 or something, outbreak started there. And because of the very unhygienic conditions in that wet market. Wet market means they actually kill the animals in front of the customer. The customer comes, chooses an animal, and they chop its head off, and the blood goes all over the place. And they prepare it, and the customer takes that dead animal home and eats it. But they'll not only have regular dead animals like chickens and sheep, but they also have exotic meat such as snakes and lizards and pangolins and so forth. So the antithesis is that no, it didn't start in the wet market. It started in the Biological Research Institute, and somehow or other, these hybrids of the COVID or this type of virus got out of came out of that institute into the wet market, and now it's been spread all over the world. And then a synthesis is that it might have been the institute, and it might have not been the institute, but the real reason is that the Chinese used this much more deadly virus to promote their agenda of becoming the dominant power in the world, dominant culture, the dominant military, and they used the virus to destroy the American economy, and by destroying the economy, they'll destroy the funding of the army. America will become a weak country, and China will become the dominant country. Well, that way we have this is an example. It may not be the best example, but it's an example of a thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. Okay, so Hegel came up with this theory of how to analyze history. Then Marx, and now this is strictly theoretical and philosophical. Then Marx studied Hegel's theory, and he used it to analyze history in his particular way. And he said, well, history is one long, the history of the world is one long struggle between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. Proletariat means the workers, and bourgeoisie means like the capitalists. And and therefore, all throughout history, there's been this struggle going on, and every time there's an empire that builds up based on the capitalists controlling the money and the factories and the means of production, and then later it fails because capitalism is a corrupt system. It just increases the greed and downtrodden's the mass of people who are working, and then a new system comes up based on a new set of capitalists and a new set of workers, and again that develops based on greed and economic development and greed, and again that collapses, and then a new civilization comes up that is also corrupt based on the same principles of economic development and greed. So then Marx said, this is unacceptable, and we have to have a communist system where you don't have capitalists who are controlling money. The workers actually should own the factories, and they should share equally, according to the needs of everyone, the benefits of that factory. So he used that Hegelian, let's say, methodology of analysis called a dialectic, but adopted it to make his own theory of history. Okay, so why am I bringing this up? Because this is another approach. See, now, the Vedic approach to analysis of history is different. It's based on the premise that we all originally come from Krishna, and because of free will or limited free will, some people reject Krishna. Therefore, they have to come into the material world, and in the material world, their purpose is to dominate and exploit nature. And it doesn't really matter whether you do it in the communist way, or the capitalist way, or the socialist way, or the fascist way, or the anarchist way, or the monarchical way. It's the same thing, that everybody, not just the capitalists, or not just the fascists or the dictators, but everybody is trying to dominate nature and exploit it for sense gratification. So there's a different way of analyzing history. Now, which one is correct? Obviously, the Vedic way is correct because it's more encompassing. It's not just the capitalists that are exploiters. Everyone is an exploiter. And that exploiting tendency is there because we're coming originally from Krishna. But Krishna is the supreme exploiter, and we are not meant to exploit. We're meant to cooperate with Krishna. If you cooperate with Krishna, then, according to the Upanishad, you receive everything that you need easily. And if you don't cooperate with Krishna, you're struggling all the time. So, again, there's a Vedic way, dialectic way, and there's Marx's dialectical way. Which one is correct? Well, Prabhupada brings it down to this. Let's analyze, or let's compare Marx, who came up with the dialectical analysis, communist dialectical analysis. Let's compare Marx to Krishna, because Marx was the man, Karl Marx was the man who came up with this theory, communist theory of analysis of history, and Krishna is the one who came up with his understanding of the origin of the world and why there is a material world, why people are in the material world, and so forth. So, obviously, Marx doesn't stand very high in comparison to Krishna. Why? Because everything has an original cause, and Krishna is the cause of all causes. Now, the people who claim, like Marx, that God doesn't exist and there's no supernatural cause of the material world, but yet in the material world, everything that we see that's man-made has an original cause. There's a person behind it. Just like Marx is the person who more or less is credited with the communist philosophy, and Marx, and then other people too, like Engels and then Stalin and so forth. But they're all people. And Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, and Bill Gates, the founder of Microsoft, and Ellison is the founder of his company, and so forth. So whenever there's an organization, or whether it's in business, or it's a country, or this or that, just like George Washington is the founder of America and so forth, there's always a person. And there's always an origin. There's an original cause. And that cause is always a person in the material world. And therefore, that points to the fact that the original cause of everything is a person. That's the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Because there's nothing that we know in the material world that doesn't have a cause. And that cause is always a person, whether it's a business, or it's a country, or it's a artwork, or it's a building, or whatever is man-made, is made by a person. And whatever is in nature, it's nyaya, it's deductive. There must be a person behind it. Okay, so now we have a theory. Our theory of knowledge is becoming more detailed based on our understanding of Vedic, let's say, knowledge. So let's continue a little bit more with this lecture by Prabhupada, and then I'm going to give you your homework. Because if you don't know what the theory of knowledge is, now it's very clear that the materialists don't know what the theory of knowledge is. We just read they don't really have a consensus. But they're saying, well, that doesn't matter. We'll have a general understanding of what we think knowledge is. And so we'll just continue on with epistemology. Epistemology means how you know if something is true or false. They define epistemology a little bit different, but that's what it actually is. So, and how do you know? Well, in the Vedic tradition, you have three pramanas, Nyaya, Shruti, and Smriti. That's how you will know. And in these three pramanas, the whole beginning of them is that everything is coming from Krishna, the supreme cause of all causes. Therefore, we have our Shastra, which is proof. They don't have any proof. They just have a bunch of guesses. Okay, so then Prabhupada explains, in this lecture, let me just see. Yeah, he says, we have to learn everything through the spiritual master. Now, who is the original spiritual master? That's Krishna. And who is the spiritual master after Krishna? Anyone who repeats Krishna's words correctly, without deviation. So if someone deviates from Krishna's words, they're no longer a spiritual master. Prabhupada says, we have to learn everything through the spiritual master. You cannot understand directly. Well, we can see that. After thousands of years of speculation, they still cannot define clearly and with a consensus what is knowledge. Okay, so you cannot understand directly. That is not possible. Directly means with your senses and your speculation. You have to go through the medical college. So he says, just like if you purchase one medical book and read it at home, you cannot become a doctor or a medical man. You have to go through the medical college and professors. Similarly, the Shastra says, Tad Vigyanartam Sagurum Eva Bhikachet. The Mundaka Upanishad 1.2.12. If you want to learn the transcendental science, you must go through the bona fide guru. And Krishna also says this. This is Vedic injunction. It's a Vedic rule that you cannot avoid. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Tat vidi paripatena paripasnena seva upatekshami te jnanam jnaninas tatvadarshana. Bhagavad Gita, 4th chapter, 34th verse. One has to approach a person who has seen God. Tattvadarshi. How God can be seen? Tattvadarshi. Tattvadarshi means one who knows the truth. Truth means how to see. See, that's beautiful. Truth means how to see. That's the definition of philosophy in Sanskrit. How to see properly. That means Tattvadarshi means one who's always seeing the truth. Pasyanti jnana chaksusa. So pasyanti means the eyes of knowledge. What is the eyes of knowledge, or how do you see? Pasyanti means how to see. So how do you see? Pasyanti jnana chaksusa. One has to see through Vedic knowledge. Shastra chaksusa. If somebody challenges, have you seen God? Yes, I have seen. How? Through Shastra. Through Shastra. God reveals. You cannot see, even God comes before you. In other words, even if God comes before you, you cannot see. We know that. God's Son came in front of everyone, Jesus. No, very few people understood he was the Son of God. God himself came. Krishna, a handful of people understood that he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Not everybody. Sisupala didn't see. Pondraka didn't see. Although they were seeing Krishna, but they didn't see him as the personality of Godhead. Until, of course, they were killed. Then they saw, this is the personality of Godhead because he's killing me. Just like Krishna was present, here is God before you. But you cannot understand. Unless we are advanced in Krishna consciousness, we'll think, what is this? A statue of stone? He is God? Yes, he is God. Otherwise, why we are spending so much money wasting time? No, in other words, we spend so much money getting fresh flowers every day, changing the clothes, bathing the deity, offering 6-7 times prasadam. No, here is God. But how you can see God? Premanjana churita bhakti vilochanena. Brahma Samhita 5:38. You can see God by applying the salve of love to your eyes that will melt the cataract that's stopping you from seeing. If you have a cataract, you're able to see, but there's a film that covers your eye that covers it so you can't see. But you can have a cataract operation and take that film away, and now you can see again because you were not blind. Your eyes were just covered. So this Premanjana Charita Bhakti Vilochanena, it teaches us how to see God. You have to make the eyes to see God. Otherwise, God is everywhere. So they may ask that if God is everywhere, why you are worshiping an idol? He's not an idol. He is God. But he is seeing. But you are seeing idol. Unless he has developed love for God, he cannot see. So here he is. He's saying that unless you have the love for God, you cannot see. And you can only develop love for God by knowing who God is. And the only way you can know who God is through the words of bona fide guru and Vedic literatures. Bona fide Vedic literatures. God is there, but because our eyes cannot see the Spirit at the present moment, our dull material eyes, just like you are spirit soul, I am spirit soul, your father is spirit soul, your mother is spirit soul, but you are seeing this, but are you seeing the spirit soul? When the spirit soul goes away, you're crying, my father is gone, my father is gone. Why father is gone? He's lying on the bed. His body is lying on the bed. You have seen the coat, the pants, the hands, legs. That is there. Why you say gone? No, he's gone. No. Yes, that's it. That's his body, and those are the pants that he likes and the coat that he likes. But he's not there. So we cannot see the spirit soul even of our father and mother. Then how can you see God? See, Prabhupada is brilliant. So you can't even see the soul of your father and mother. So how can you expect to see God? the Supreme Spirit. Therefore, God comes before you just like stone, which you can see. It is to favor you. God is everything. So in this way, we have to understand God. See, God is everything. That the stone is also the energy of God, so he can be represented by a stone when it's carved properly and consecrated by the pran pratishtha ceremony. And if anyone understands, then he becomes immediately fit for going back to Godhead. Tyakva deham punarajanma naiti mam eti konteya janma karma chame divyam evam yo veti tatvataha. So this is Bhagavad Gita 4.9. Okay, so now we have Brahma Samhita 5.38, Bhagavad Gita 4.34, and Bhagavad Gita 4.9. So you want to read those three verses and the purports to support your theory of knowledge. That's your homework. Read those three verses, 4.34, 4.30, 4.9, 4.34, 4.9, and Brahma Samhita 5, 38, 5:38. You read those three verses and three purports, and now add on to your essay on the theory of knowledge. And if you read the purports, there's more information in the purports that you can use. There's also Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya 23.14-15. So Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Lila, chapter 23, verses 14 and 15. Okay, now you have your homework. We want to develop a much more complete theory of knowledge. It's actually not a theory now. It's actually what is knowledge. We're going to do what all the great philosophers of the world have not been able to do in the last 2,500 years. That is, all the speculators. We're going to develop the theory of knowledge, because unless you have an understanding of what is knowledge, how can you learn knowledge? That's the whole point. In school, they're trying to teach you knowledge without knowing what knowledge is. That's the point. And so today, starting today, we're going to learn what is actually knowledge. And that way you'll know also what is not knowledge. Then you can learn what is knowledge. Haribol. All glories to Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Are there any questions that you would like to ask? Our faithful Daniel Prabhu is there, Dr. Daniel, the doctor of the internet, and he's waiting to hear if you have any questions. Well, that's why I asked you to read Brahma Samhita 5:38 and the purport by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. That's a good question. And let's take a look at the purport real quick. It says, the Shama Sundara form of Krishna is his inconceivable, simultaneous, personal and impersonal, self-contradictory form. True devotees see that form in their purified hearts under the influence of devotional trance. So this is what Brahma saw in the Brahma Samhita. That's why he wrote the Brahma Samhita. He saw the form of Krishna in the Shamsundar form. This is what Arjuna saw on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. He saw Shamsundar's form in front of him driving the chariot. This is what Bhismadeva saw when Krishna was coming toward him to kill him. You say, this is what people have seen, but how did they see this form? Well, Sisupala saw that form with envy and hatred. Bhismadev saw it with love. Arjuna saw it with love. Right? Brahma saw it with love. So it says, the form Shama is not the blue color visible in the mundane world, but is the transcendental variegated color affording eternal bliss, and is not visible to the mortal eye. So you have to develop the eye. We have a mortal eye. You have to develop the immortal eye. So that process is explained in 4.9 in the purport and 4.34. So now that's why these three verses are so important. And the purports are so important. You're going to learn that you develop your eternal eye by developing love for Krishna. And to develop love for Krishna, you have to know who Krishna is. You have to have real knowledge of who is God. Then you can begin to love God, and as you love God, then you develop that immortal eye, not the mortal eye. And you'll be able to see Krishna everywhere. And then you're full of love. You're surrounded by Krishna, and you're full of love for Krishna. So that's the hint. So you do your research and write your more complete essay on knowledge. They say theory of knowledge, we say real knowledge. Haribol. All glories to Prabhupada. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you very much. Have fun. Before you learn knowledge, you have to know what is knowledge. So you see, they can't tell you what is knowledge in school, and all the great philosophers in the last 2,500 years in the West have not been able to come to a consensus understanding of knowledge. But we've done it in 2 sessions by hearing Prabhupada and listening and carefully reading his purports. Haribol. All glories to Srila Prabhupada ki jai.